One of the most important skills of leadership is problem solving. Yet so many of us spend time solving the same problem over and over and over again. Today, we're going to talk about how to become an expert problem solver. Today's episode is titled, Stop Solving the Same Problem.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Echo Leadership Podcast. My name is David. I'm one of the hosts, and I'm here with Andy Wood. And today we are talking about a conversation about solving problems.
Yeah, I think so many of us feel like we keep solving the same problem over and over again, and we want to stop doing that.
That's right. And all of our parents can relate to this. All of our leaders can relate because this is a problem that comes up quite a bit.
Yes.
Hey, to help you with the conversation today, a couple things that always are helpful to know. One, we release a brand new episode the first business day of every month, and we have some great notes that go along with each episode so you can take down notes, get applications, because we want to be leaders that apply what we're hearing. So go over to echo.church/leadership podcast. That's echo.church/leadership podcast. Just give us your email right there, and we'll send you the notes that go right along with this episode.
It's good, David.
Yeah, man.
You know, this conversation started for me personally. I had a day recently, and I was dealing with the same problem on a Monday morning that I had dealt with on a Monday morning before. And I was starting to get more frustrated, and I was like, man, I need to think about this problem at a higher level. And I picked up a book somebody had recommended. It's called The Road Less Stupid.
I love the title already.
Yeah, and that book really challenged my thinking around problem solving. And part of what happened for me was the realization that a lot of times my frustration affects my ability to solve problems. So I sat down with a notebook and just kind of pinned up some thoughts that we started a conversation around with our directional leadership team, our staff, and it's been a really helpful conversation for us.
So let me ask you this, like leaders get into having some of the same problems come up, and we're going to unpack a few ways to stop solving the same problem. Is there anything that you think leaders have to be in a right mental state in order to be able to really address the problem?
Yeah, the emotion oftentimes clouds our judgment. So I think when you're overly angry or you're just beating yourself up over the same problem, it's good to create some space. So whether that's 24 hours or it's an hour that you're setting aside to think about the problem, but there is some power in not being emotional when you're trying to solve it.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good word right now for anybody who's listening to this, just to think about your problem. And you're probably feeling some emotion around that problem. For many leaders, it's probably got anger, but then there's probably insecurity or fear in some problems, is to go ahead and start addressing that and say, hey, let's park that emotion. Let's jump into just talking about the problem.
That's great. Yeah. One of the other things that's been super helpful on this is the realization that there are different types of leaders. One type of leader is a goal setter. The second type of leader is an opportunist. And then a third type of leader is a problem solver. And you do have to be good at all three of those to be a great leader. And we all naturally have kind of our own bent. I tend to be very goal-driven. A lot of times problems will seem like they get in my way until I end up having to solve the same problem over and over again.
Yeah, because it's getting in the way of you winning at your goal.
Exactly. That's right.
So you got to address it.
So the first idea here is to put a parenthesis around the problem.
All right. So what do you mean by that? Because I have a feeling you're going to talk about emotion here a little bit, about helping separate somehow.
Yeah. Henry Cloud has this idea. He talks about whenever there's a problem, we tend to do three things. We make it permanent, we make it pervasive, and we make it personal. So permanent means that like this problem's never going to go away. We lose hope. When we make it pervasive, we take one cloud in the sky and we think that the whole sky is cloudy. And then the personalization is when I make it like my fault, that I'm the one that made this problem happen. So I'm unable to see the problem clearly. And this comes in parenting. This comes in leadership. This comes at any job that you have. The natural tendency is to get in this place where you don't see a way out, where you feel like everything in your life is messed up because of one problem. And you feel like, man, there's nothing that you can do to solve it, because you're the one that created it.
And that's really where, like we talked about earlier, that mental state, because when you're tired, worn out, beat down, came out of this past year. Last month, we released an episode on leveraging the art of leveraging failure.
Right.
When you have just failed in all of these things and then a problem keeps coming up, it's pretty hard to kind of stick in there.
Mm-hmm.
So what's helped you then in this, like kind of taking from what you're hearing from Henry Cloud to kind of say, okay, here's how I separate out my emotion, how I feel to solve it.
I'll get really practical. So one of the challenges that we had recently was around some of our audio visual equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had some challenges with this for years on end. And specifically, there were a few weeks back to back where in our kind of work, we capture a message, we send it to our different locations, and like every week for about 3 or 4 weeks in a row, the sound was off, some of the video
Mm-hmm.
issues were off, and you're experiencing it as you're one of our site pastors, and you're like, okay, this is not good. I'm getting it from you and from other campus pastors, and I just said, like, one day I was like, man, I'm really upset about this. We've talked about this multiple times. But then when I was able to slow down and say, okay, well, we have one person who's been in the role, but they've been wearing 3 hats. We brought another person into the role. They just stepped into this role. Everybody in the situation wants to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. Everybody here we have the right people on the bus. My emotion and their emotion is not going to help us solve the problem. And we can get it. It may be a few steps. It may take some money. It may be a different way of thinking. But it's me changing the way that I see the problem, putting it a parenthesis around it. Sometimes when it's pervasive, we're trying to solve 5 or 6 problems at once. So when I put a parenthesis around it, what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, this is the problem that we're trying to solve. And I'm going to try to look at the problem isolated, not in the sense that the problem's not connected to a bunch of other things, but I'm not connecting that problem to my emotion. I'm not going to try to think over and over again how historical the problem is. I'm not going to try to project what's going to happen if I don't solve the problem. I'm just going to put a parenthesis around it and work on the problem.
Do you feel that that's something you have historically done, or do you feel like you learned that skill or that trait somewhere?
The good side or the bad side?
Maybe like the removing the emotion, because I think what you're kind of being in some of these meetings with you is removing the emotion is trying to help disarm people.
Yeah.
So many leaders, I'm sure, can respond out of their emotion, and depending on what kind of leader you want to be, you can either just be the steamroller and you just, I don't care about people's emotions. I'm going to just crush people because I'm going to get to my goal. Or you can, try to remove that to lead and build people with you. So I know you've been a little bit in this journey, but like what has allowed you to get to this point where you're like, I can recognize this emotion and I'm choosing how I'm going to respond?
Yeah, some of it for me is bottom line in the sense of the emotion doesn't work. So if
your emotion doesn't work, or other.
So like if I have a problem, I have a big enough track record of throwing emotion at a problem and it not solving it. So
there's some failures in the past.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, if it doesn't work, why would I keep doing the same thing over and over again? I need a better way to do this. And there is a sense in which a leader can walk in and they can bang their hands on the table and I want this problem solved today, or better yet, I want it solved yesterday.
Yeah.
But does that really produce fruit, and does it really solve the problem? It doesn't solve the problem. Mm-hmm. So I want to actually solve the problem, and the realization that my approach on the problem could make it worse or it could move towards a solution, I think is what has motivated me over time to change. I know that sounds very self-serving. It doesn't sound like overly relational, but for me, I just had to learn that the way my personality is wired. I would also say that I'm very motivated by winning, but I'm secondly motivated by winning with others. So I know that as I look at a problem, my natural tendency can be to see the problem and not see anything around the problem in terms of the people that are there and think, oh, I just got to solve the problem. And what flipped for me on the mindset was, what's the greater win with this problem? The greater win with the problem is not me solving the problem. The greater win with the problem is the development of the people who surround the problem. So when I switched my thinking around on that, and I said, really, the problem we're trying to solve is not the problem. The problem that we're trying to solve is the development of the people who are solving the problem. And that shift for me helped me see, okay, this problem exists to develop people. People don't exist to solve the problem. The problem exists to develop the people. That shift for me, I think, really did help me.
And I think that's a key statement, I think, in this that somebody needs to write down and go back and think about, because I think a lot of times as leaders, especially in our younger years and our immaturity, the emotion is what comes out. And we've talked about this before. The more anger from a leader, the more emotion that's there, the higher the fear or anxiety can go on the team, because now instead of innovating or processing a different way, you're just trying to get your boss to not emotionally berate you.
Right.
So what you're doing in that is you're saying, I can still be direct, yet remove my emotion. Like, so you can still come in and be very direct. Like,
hey guys, this is an issue.
Yeah,
we need to solve it.
This is unacceptable. We're going to solve it. We got 2 weeks to solve it. I believe you guys can do it, but in 2 weeks it needs to be done.
Right.
Any questions you need from me? Right. Like, you can be very direct with people. Like,
yeah, we're not saying don't address the problem. We're not saying don't be direct about the problem. We're just saying you don't need anger. You don't need to insert anger or anxiety into the situation to get the problem solved. Or to help people grow.
And the goal is when you put the parentheses around it and you use it to develop people, you actually build the strength of your team long term.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that's the gold right there, what you're saying. That's really good.
I know we're camping on this one quite a bit, but the other aspect of this, I think this is a line you came up with, is that my problems are somebody else's prayers. So the things that we're sitting around struggling with, somebody else is wishing that they had our issues.
Yeah.
And maybe that doesn't necessarily help me solve the problem, but it certainly helps me address the problem with more gratitude in my heart, and to see it as like, solving this problem is a privilege. Problems are always present. Jesus said one time that you always have the poor with you.
Yeah.
And I think that there are always problems in this broken world. And when you're making progress, kind of like we talked about in the last episode about failure, when you're making progress, you always have problems.
Absolutely.
And that problem speaks to you that you're making progress. And all that just kind of neutralizes the emotion to help you work on the issue at hand.
That's a good way to put it. If you have problems, it means you're making progress.
Yeah.
Because if you're just sitting there, you don't really have as many problems.
I'm sitting around playing video games all day long. Except when I run out of ice cream, I don't really have that many problems.
Well, I know we camped here for a minute, but I think for us to get started, if people can begin to understand, to separate that emotion, take it off of me, take it off of it's always going to be there, and start to separate my emotion to see the problem. Because so often we insert ourselves into the problem and we can't see clearly. So I think this is the number one thing for us to stop solving the same problem.
Good.
So anything else? Or you're going to move on to the second?
No, I think we can move on to the second one. And that one is to go to the root before you go to the fruit. And a lot of people tend to start with the fruit without addressing what's underneath what is being produced on top.
So you got to not just look at the top.
Yes. So for example, like in this book, The Road Less Stupid, he talks about if you're trying to lose weight, the natural tendency is like, okay, well, I'm going to get new gym clothes and I'm going to get a gym membership. And so you're like, okay, I'm coming up with solutions to the problem. But what he says is a better question to ask is like, why am I out of shape now? Because you can go start hacking away at trying to come up with solutions to the problem. But until you understand why you got into the situation you're in, you're not actually going to create a solution that deals with the highest level problem. So when you look at problems, let's say it's a communication issue at your place of work, or it's confusion on the team, or it's a new opportunity that you don't have resources for. There's always a root underneath what the issue is. And most of the time, what's underneath is a way of thinking. It's perhaps a hard attitude, but there's something that is driving the problem that we're dealing with. And the closer I can get to that, the more I can come up with a solution that is sustainable.
You know, it's kind of like we have a mentor who's been working with us and our leadership team. And one of the things he's been explaining to us kind of similar to this is a lot of times people, they look at scaling and they say, well, what system do I need to get me from here to there to run to do that? But a lot of people don't ask the question, what system has gotten me to where I am today?
Yeah.
Even the unspoken, it's not written down, we just are operating out of this set of norms. So we recently, even one example, we did culture index test with our staff. We looked at it and it showed us some staffing gaps of some key kind of wirings and people that we need, which we didn't realize were there. So we had a system that got us to where we are. And so now that we're able to address that system, now we look at, all right, what system is running today? Now we can talk about the future one, which is really getting into the root before we just go, what fruit do we want to have?
Yeah, and so much of this, I think, is the awareness at that level of what is at the bottom of it. And, you know, when you think about the things that we actually can change, we won't change what we don't see. So if it's not on our periphery and we don't understand it, then it's really hard to get to the solution.
So how do you, your lead pastor, be equivalent, maybe like a CEO in a company, like you're leading at the top, how do you get to see things that, like you just said, if I can't see it, I can't solve it?
Yeah.
How are you finding these problems and seeing them?
Well, the further into the organization a problem is solved, the healthier the organization is. So I, first of all, want to make sure that we've created a system where people feel empowered to solve their own problems, and they don't feel like every problem has to roll through me or their supervisor. But within that, probing is one way. You ask questions, and then part of the thinking on it, I love in this book, The Road Less Stupid, he says...
Great title.
Yeah. He says that the right answer is smart, but the right question is brilliant, or the right question is genius. And some of that comes to the question that you ask people, so probing. The other is just asking the right question on a piece of paper and doing like thinking time, where you're taking a question. So for example, if you have a problem that exists in the organization, like let's say you have a revenue question, a revenue issue, you ask the question, well, what would it take for us to double our revenue over the next 6 months? You're switching it and you're thinking at it a higher level on the problem. And I find that if I can get the right question around the issue, and then if I can probe when I'm in conversation, that helps me get to the right problem.
I love that. So do you go around, like, do you typically start to pick up, like, I think there might be a problem here, and so you start to ask the questions?
Usually problems get on my radar when they're repetitive. I make the assumption that when there's a problem, it's going to get solved. And then if it's a smaller problem that's not getting solved, that's not impeding progress, and usually doesn't get on my radar. But I think as things go along, as the problem becomes more and more of a roadblock, that's when it comes to my radar. But what I want to do in my seat is I want to solve as many advanced problems as possible, and I want to empower people to solve their own problems as much as possible.
Yeah, so maybe if a team is listening to this together right now, you can just start writing down, what are the repetitive problems that we're solving? Because if you have a repetitive problem, then there's probably something in the root that you need to go back to.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and it's back. I have to be mindful. Usually something will be there, and I'll think about it, and then eventually it rises to the level that it's like, okay, nobody's dealing with this. Somebody needs to deal with it, and the best solution is ultimately a person, right? So it's not a system, it's not a strategy, as much as it is empowering somebody to develop a system and a strategy.
That's really good. So that kind of leads us into number 3, I think, when you get the right person.
Yeah.
And we want to go ahead.
Yeah, part of what we're saying here is that number 3 is to address the big roadblocks. And we talked about this actually a while back on one of our episodes, this concept of the whoop and the wish, outcome, obstacle plan,
Opportunities.
opportunity plan. And you're identifying what are the obstacles that stand in the way.
Mm-hmm.
So one question to drive to is, why has this problem not already been solved?
Mm-hmm.
And taking the weight example of losing weight, why am I 10 pounds heavy? Well, I'm 10 pounds heavy because, I eat 3,500 calories a day, or I exercise twice a week. And when I'm stressed out, I eat. And then, I have a bad habit of having a rice roller with peanut butter on it after dinner. And so the more
that sounds a little too specific of an example right there.
Yeah, that's my kryptonite. I love rice rollers with peanut butter. And if you do the compound effect of them over a year, you get about 5 pounds. So my point is, if I can address the big obstacles in terms of why the problem hasn't been solved already, then it allows me to know if I'm going to make progress, I'm going to run into the exact same problem that I've run into before. So if I can solve the big issue, it's like vacation. Vacation's a good example. We want to go on vacations with our family. Yes, the question, why haven't we gone on a vacation before? Well, we didn't have the money. We didn't put the time on the calendar. We never decided on a spot. We never aligned multiple people's schedules. So if I want to solve the problem, I just take all those obstacles around the problem and the big roadblocks that have prevented us from actually getting to the destination before are still there. But now I can preemptively solve them for the future.
Mm-hmm. What do you think keeps most people from sitting down and just processing through these roadblocks?
I think most people work in their lives and not on their lives. Most people work in their organizations, not on their organizations. And we're all guilty for it. When I picked up the Road Less Stupid book, I was like, why have I not been doing this and thinking like this?
Yeah.
And you just get so busy. And what's crazy to think about is 1 hour of thinking can save you 1,000 hours of execution. And when you think about it like that, why would you not work on it before you work in it?
Yeah.
And, for pastors and for followers of Jesus, there's a spiritual side to this, because I can actually do this prayerfully. And I believe in my role. And I think this is true for business leaders. God wants to help guide my thoughts, so I can do it prayerfully. So why wouldn't I do that if I knew the reason why is I'm so busy? So that's actually a problem, right?
Yeah.
That I got to solve.
Yeah.
The way I solve it is I put time on my calendar to think about a problem with the right question, whether it's 45 minutes or an hour, and come up with solutions. But working in it is a big problem.
Yeah, and if you don't do the thinking, then your execution suffers. And it's really funny, like with that in it and on it. I had a point recently, I felt like I was really working on it. I felt like I was real clear. I was running, and then I had a few weeks where it was just back-to-back meetings. And I told my wife these words last week. I said, I am getting close to the point where my vision for the next couple weeks is starting to run thin.
Yeah.
I still have like the long term, but I don't know what to do this next month because I just haven't been able to stop and think. And so there is a real importance in that for people to stop.
I think one really practical side of this that even for my schedule that I've realized is if I am back to back to back to back to back to back to back, and I don't have any space between the things that I'm doing, and I never can come up for air. So you have a meeting, and if you took 15 minutes after that meeting to pound out your next steps and put a couple things into action and put it in a place where you'd remember it, you would save yourself 10 hours of work later. But my tendency is just to cram with no margin.
Yeah.
So I'm like, now I'm even saying, how do I have 30 minutes between appointments. It's not that I'm not going to work there, and this is going to sharpen the saw to make me more effective.
So let me ask you this: we're here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're down in San Jose, Silicon Valley. We talk about that. That's the Echo Leadership Collective. This is where we serve. This is the leaders we want to invest in, and this is a hard charging, fast paced like area. So how are you? I'm sure you're talking about how do I create this margin. You're feeling that pull of fast paced push. If most of our leaders who are listening on this, they're probably listening because they're pretty driven and they're wanting to get better. What is are there any mental, if you will,
Metaphors
or even barriers you're having to break through in this pace to say it's not about maximizing every minute, if you will, of like slam it, but it's about creating, like you're saying, that margin is really what is going to help me lead better. Is there some kind of mental barrier hoop you're having to jump through?
I would say I'm like actively working on it.
Yeah, well, we're trying to be real, man.
Yeah, and I'm just realizing that the lack of margin makes me not as effective as I could be. One of the metaphors that came to mind as you were speaking is, a pilot is going really fast as he's flying an airplane. And you could be going 500 miles inside the cockpit, 500 miles an hour inside the cockpit.
Yeah.
Or you can be going 500 miles an hour on top of the airplane. And both of them, it's the same speed. One feels very different than the other.
Absolutely.
So if you protect...
Your anxiety level is different too.
Yes. And you feel much more at ease. You have you see differently. I would say that the whole cockpit concept helps. I also just think part of what I'm working on is I have to be ahead. So I can't like get to next week or 2 or 3 weeks down the road from now and not have anticipated where I'm going to be in terms of margin. And what happens to me is I go away, I get refreshed, I come back, and I have all this energy, and it's like, yes, 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 yes. And then it's like, yes, 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 no. And then it's like, yes, yes, no, no. And then it's like, no. And so it's probably healthier to say yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no. Yeah, more of a consistent cadence on that. And so I think trying to measure, like, am I running at a pace always? Not just like, when I get back from vacation, but when I get back from vacation, am I running at a pace that I can sustain?
Yeah.
Am I running today in a way that I can still be running tomorrow? And that's where the whole 20-mile march concept comes in, the whole Collins 20-mile steady pace. Now, the funny thing, Stacy and I were talking about this, my wife Stacy, we were talking about 20 miles is actually a pretty long distance if you think about it.
In a day?
Yeah.
That's a big...
So it's not like you're not moving, but it's a 20-mile march. You're running at a pace today that you can run at tomorrow. And I think that's, for me, that's the thing I'm really working on, is the sustainability, working hard, but leaving some gas in the tank for tomorrow. And maybe when you're like 25 or 24, early 20s, you can do that where you work 18 hours, you turn around, work 18 hours, and that's great. But I think now it's more, if I get 8 really solid hours of work in and I'm super focused and I leverage that time, it's okay to shut it down, have an end of the day routine, and go at it the next day again.
Yeah, especially because that way you're being a leader in your organization and you're being a leader at home and you're leading yourself. So if you burn it all ends, then you can't lead effectively in the different spheres of life even. So you've got to have that. I feel like right now we are putting parentheses around your problem. And we're getting back to the root, and then we're coming up with the roadblocks. I do think that that's really important. If you're sitting there on a team right now, you're sitting there with a leader, it's saying, is my pace preventing me from solving the same problems? Because if I don't get the brain space around it, I can't go back and solve that.
Yeah. And you can do that individually. You can also do that with your team.
Yeah.
And both of those are really good solutions, or really good tools, I should say. You can ask the same questions in a group environment. There are things that you can do to discern problems as well, to bring problems to the surface collectively. We've done a couple of these are the what's working right, what's wrong, what's missing, what's confusing, big whiteboards. We've done the SWOT, strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats, big stickies. You can also do a force ranking where you take everything that you're working on and you do like a 0 to 5. 0 sucks, 5 is awesome. And you let your team evaluate what you're doing.
Yeah.
But all of these can help you discover things that you might not have seen. I would say, kind of transitioning, I'm going to skip around here, but I would say number 4 here is to look for future problems. And part of what you can do is in solving problems is to say, if we were to go at the same pace into the future, what problems will we have a year from now? What problems will we have 2 years from now? What problems will we have 5 years from now? And what can I do today to set us up for success tomorrow? So what things can I solve now so that when we get down the road, that problem actually, everybody walks around not realizing that there was ever a problem solved in advance, but everybody's experiencing the benefits of great leadership because we solved it before the problem ever existed.
Do you link that? So when we were talking about solving the same problem and looking at the future, do you try to go, if I don't solve this now, in the future it's going to be magnified? Or are you looking at any type of future problem too with this?
It's just easier to solve if you solve it now. So if you're, things I think about here would be asset type decisions that, let's say a piece of real estate or a facility is $1 million now and it's $3 million later. And if you have the resources or you could leverage your existing assets to buy $1 million piece of property that will be worth $3 million later. So to solve that problem later, it's going to be a lot more expensive and a lot harder. You can't do that with everything because you can't buy the whole world. But if you think along those lines, leadership would be another example. I'll give you a practical example of this. We are actively working on multiplying our locations. And we've said every one of our existing 4 locations as a church, we want to see them each have what we call 3+ turns. And what that means is that every location, so let's say one campus has 550 seats. We want to see that campus average 550 times 3, which would be 1650, on average, to be prepared to launch another location out of them. In addition to that, that campus would all be identifying leaders. So, our kids leader identifying kids leaders, campus pastors identifying future campus pastors, same with students, same with groups. And if you can cultivate that mindset, when we want to launch a new campus 18 to 24 months from now, we actually have started to solve that problem before we put our foot on the gas. Then when we go to put our foot on the gas, there's actually gas in the tank. So we're preemptively working on something that we know we want to be able to do in the future. We're looking at in advance.
I love it. So let's solve the problems.
Yes. Look for future problems. Okay. I'm gonna just throw out one more practical. I know we're getting pretty close to our time here, but the last one that I want to finish on is the way that you go about solutions. So you've identified the problem, you've identified obstacles, but it's important to go from wow to how. And what I mean on this is that vision, strategy, and tactics are all different categories. And some people excel at tactics, some excel at vision, some excel at kind of the wow. And sometimes a wow person is an idea of the day person. And it's easy for somebody who's really focused on strategy. Usually you can flex a little bit, but you're going to have one primary lane that you excel at more. If you are only tactic, the natural tendency is going to be to try to go from the how up to the wow. The example I gave on this was with milk. My kids spill milk a lot at home. And I have now started to teach all of them the process of cleaning up milk. I did it with my older, but you never start cleaning up milk underneath the table. You always start on the top of the table, because if you clean the top of the table, that by the time you get to the bottom, you're good. But if you start at the bottom, by the time you get to the top, it's still pouring down.
Yeah.
So if you capture or catch a problem at the vision level and you drive from vision to tactics, you move faster because you've set boundaries on it, you've clarified expectations on it, and you remove some of the uncertainty that might exist. And going vision or how to wow, you make it easier for other people to make their own decisions. So I would rather put more energy on the wow on the front end to clarify the how on the back end, rather than giving all my energy to the how now, but never dealing with the wow.
Yeah. Well, and if you try to solve it from the how, you might be solving the wrong problem. You're not getting to the root. But then also, I would imagine within an organization, a church, a business, like when you just go to the how, you actually start to lose sight of the bigger vision. Because now you just, we got to figure this out. I got to figure out how to order this. I got to do my purchasing here. I got to lead this person. I got to manage this staff. I got to blah, blah, blah. That you take your eyes off of where we're trying to go.
Yeah. Okay. Let me give you an example since we're really practical today. Going back to this AV issue that we had recently, I got in the room with everybody who works on that, including our campus pastors.
Yep.
We'd had multiple conversations, and I looked at our stats the weekend before, and I said, all right, what would you guys guess percentage-wise, what percentage of our people watched the message live in the room where it was taught? And nobody knew the exact answer. I wouldn't expect them to, but I was like, more than half of the people watched. And if you include our online audience, 75% of the people that experienced the message experienced it outside of the room where it was captured.
Yeah.
And that's not going to change over the course of time. That's only going to grow. So the percentage of people that watch the message outside of the room will only grow in the course of time. So I started with, I said, hey guys, we've talked 100 times. Our vision is to have a thriving local church within 10 to 15 minutes of every person in the Bay Area. That means we want to help start new churches. That means we want to start new campuses. And we've talked about this. But in light of this, if this vision is ever going to be a reality and we're leveraging campuses to stream messages, we're not just solving a problem for today. We're solving a problem for 15 years from now, and we'll never get to that vision if we don't solve this problem. That's very different than coming in and saying, hey guys, what is this fuzz that is being streamed to the campus? I'm coming from the wow, the big picture all the way down.
Yeah.
And it's easier. And it's easier just to, in that instance, 7 minutes. I believe in you guys. You can do it. And then there's a few other people in the room that know what they're doing, and there's a little bit more of an accountability. But as a senior leader, I can pop out after that. But that process really does help solve a problem top down.
Absolutely. And so I think anybody can do that, whatever team they're leading too. What's the vision where we're trying to get to? Why does this matter? How are we going to get there? And bring it down to that. You can use this in your own life too. You want to lose weight? We keep coming back to that one with the gym. So you can stop those rice rollers, man, if you get your wow.
Actually, I already have stopped them.
I'm proud of you. That's good.
I'm doing them in the middle of the day instead of right before I go to bed.
Well, that's one way to move around your problems.
Yes. So. Move the obstacle.
Yeah. Well, anything else to close us out?
I would just say that this is a really important part of leadership. And if you can become an expert at solving problems, and more importantly, thinking about problems the right way, and knowing that as you're solving problems, you're growing. If you're a follower of Jesus, God uses problems to develop you. If you are a leader who's in the business of working with people and seeing them grow and develop, which should be all of us, problems are one of the greatest conduits for people development. And if you can look at it through that lens, it puts you at ease, and it allows you to solve problems in a way that equips and empowers other people to solve the problem long after you're gone.
That's really good. Well, Andy, thank you for the time today and the investment in all of us. And thanks for joining us for another episode of the Echo Leadership Podcast. Hey, just a reminder, we were going to release a brand new episode every first business day of the month. We also have some bonuses here and there, especially some awesome interviews. You can go back and check those out. And then don't forget to get those notes at echo.church/leadership podcast and join in on the conversation with us as we continue this podcast. So we hope it helps you. And we want to help you get just a little bit better every month. So we look forward to seeing you in a future episode.